just run through what we're going to have a look at today. I think Greg's going to talk you through very briefly the 2020 LMC Practice Manager Survey. We're not going to go through it in detail, but there was some really, really good information coming out there, both in terms of the commitment that practice managers feel to their practices and also the pressures that they're feeling all the time, but particularly at the moment, given the current situation with COVID. So I'll take a look after that at the effect of the pandemic on workplace relations. The HR community has been in overdrive, obviously, over the past 10, 12 months, working out the effect of the pandemic on workplace relations, the relationships between employees and the owners of a business. We'll take a brief look at the changing role of general practice managers and how it's changed, perhaps over the last 20 years. I'll run through that briefly, and I'll perhaps open up some questions at that stage about what you think is going to happen next in terms of the role of practice managers, with perhaps more reforms around the corner for primary care. We'll take a look at conflicts. This is a big one for us. The conflict that we deal with in general practice is best handled when everything is understood by the practice manager and their partners. And there are times when the partners must step in to support conflict resolution. Ultimately, it's the partners that end up in court, and consequently, it's the partners that need to be involved in conflict resolution within their practices. We'll also take a brief look at that stage at conflict between partners and practice managers. That's a very difficult thing to deal with for obvious reasons. It's up there with partnership disputes, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the potential destructive nature of those processes on relationships. We'll take a brief look at workforce reporting. So I've had a bee in my bonnet for a long time about the way that partners receive information from practice managers about how the practice is performing. Small organizations, so no need for anything particularly sophisticated, but equally it takes time. But in order for partners to have their fingers on the pulse of the business that can ultimately sink or swim, then workforce reporting, financial reporting, and all that sort of stuff, vitally important. And then we'll take a look at engaging with your practice manager and workforce. We'll take a look at some theory there, some things that practices might do in order to make sure that the partner is engaged with the practice manager, and that the practice manager is fully engaged with the people that work within the practice, the nurses, the salaried GPs, the receptionists, and so on. And finally, I'm going to take a very brief look at employment law this year, the agenda that's ahead of us, albeit disrupted by coronavirus and also, of course, Brexit. So, Greg.
Thank you. So
yeah.
This is the LMC survey, and of course, practice managers have links in with the LMC. They talk to the LMC fairly frequently. These are all anonymized, and when you ask practice managers what their roles are, there are some fairly obvious things here, and you can see those 5 bullet points, and they immediately come to mind. But of course, what doctors do, and I'm as guilty as the next person, is when I have a question to which I don't know the answer, I will often send the question upstairs to the practice manager. And when I don't know what a bit of the contract will say, I will ask the practice manager. And when I don't know what the financial position of our current account is, I'll ask the practice manager. So we ask an awful lot of our practice managers, and sometimes you don't really realize what we are asking of our practice managers. So not just the PM roles, which we may or may not really understand, and I will say I didn't understand as much as I perhaps do now, but what the practice managers feel as well. So the summary of the findings is also quite, I wouldn't say it's unsurprising, it is perhaps a little alarming that they feel quite as they do. And of course, when you do an anonymous survey, you want to know how they feel, and you sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable when you see the findings, John. So if you could reveal these. I think a bit like Carter's talk at the beginning, it makes us feel perhaps a little bit uncomfortable, and we've got to be thoughtful, I think, about what this shows. So contracted hours, are we paying them overtime? Are we giving them time in lieu? Are we actually giving them enough support? do we actually have enough practice management in place? The support we give them, we ask a lot of them, are they able to come back to us in the same way? And I think we know the answer to that. Stress and anxiety, this is not uncommon, but how do we deal with this? And we're going to hear later about mindfulness and such like things, but that's relatively easy. We have support through the LMC, but what support do the practice managers have? And what we want to do is to put support in place so they don't become unwell, so they stay as a valuable part, essential part. And then, of course, the final foot is this general support, awareness, and understanding of their role. And I suspect because they are often in an office, away from the clinical front line, you might say, because they are often distant within the building even, it is easy for them to feel isolated. I think too easy as well. And we need to look at that as well. So that's the survey, and just by itself, it produces an awful lot of soul searching and thinking, I think.
Thank you very much, Greg. I mean, I think for me, the feeling of isolation, potentially practice managers, is an issue, a big issue. They have to deal with operations, IT, finance, HR, and it all happens at once. It's an immensely complex job. It requires a huge range of skills and also the ability to manage stress, to manage multiple priorities, and to be that linchpin, if you like, between the partners, the owners of the risk, the business, and the people that deliver the service, the staff. So they are in a very difficult situation in many ways, and it's no small feat. And I think it's a credit to the LMC that they conduct the survey, and they decide on the back of that survey to have this little session in terms of how partners can support their practice managers. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so some recurring themes. I mean, we're not out of COVID. I mean, goodness knows how long it's going to take us, but we've been very busy with employers in the past 12 months dealing with COVID and the rules. So some recurring themes, really. We've had constant issues with people acting inappropriately at work and GP employers wanting to deal with that. That might be something like not wearing PPE appropriately. It might be coming into work with symptoms. It might be a grievance that's raised against somebody else for some reason associated with COVID. So amidst everything else you've got going on, you've also got this increased tension in your workplaces at the moment, which is not easy to deal with. Outside of that, we've got conduct outside of work. So this is the likes of people that have been known to be not socially isolating when they should be. People that have been doing things and posting it on Facebook. How do we deal with that as employers? Is that a disciplinary process? What can we do about it? So conduct outside of work is probably more difficult to deal with than inside of work, but certainly any issues that arise in relation to that, it's now becoming a well-trodden path. So you should be in a position to understand what to do. You can always call us, of course. Then, of course, it's all over the news at the moment, isn't it? Declining the vaccine. What do we do in those circumstances? Very sensitive arguments associated with all sorts of things, but primarily disability discrimination and how you can induce people to ensure that you've got 100% take up within your workforce. If you let me know, we've got draft policies on vaccines within the workforce. We can let you have those. And then we've got obviously engaging with your workforce over COVID. I think the best employers are continually talking with their staff about how they are managing during the current circumstances. That might be through informal discussions, team meetings, or surveys. So just to make sure that we are doing what we think is right according to our staff, and communicating expectations. So that really concludes what we've been up to in many ways in terms of general practice. We've been very busy outside of that with the coronavirus job retention scheme and everything else, which of course doesn't apply in general practice. Just a word on Zoom fatigue. Oh boy, are we all tired of Zoom? I certainly am. Virtual meetings are, according to the South Bank University, tiring. It takes increased recovery time compared to a normal meeting. You don't have all of the interaction that makes it pleasant in many ways and makes it something which you can take in your stride. The virtual world is unsustainable with implications for health and productivity. You know, although things have changed and are perhaps irreversible, what we need to do is to get back to normal as soon as possible for the sake of our emotional and mental health and productivity at work. So what do we do in these circumstances? Additional break times, encouraging no work beyond core hours. Now that's an interesting one. If you look at the practice manager survey, a lot of work amongst practice managers outside of normal working hours, so you know, over and above, also working in the evenings commonly, also working at weekends. And yeah, it's a management role, and yes, people are committed, but we have to be prepared to accept that ultimately this can cause real problems and burnout. Shutting down digital devices, what a lovely thing that, I can't get rid of mine, I can't turn mine off, so I can't go preaching to other people about that. And supporting healthy recovery through extracurricular activities. Okay, so this is a little bit of research from MetLife, 900 employees, 300 businesses, engagement and the degree of engagement in the current circumstances with COVID causing us problems. So 72% of employers feel employer relationship has changed. Well, no doubt about that one. 50% of employees say relationships deteriorated and it has reduced productivity. Now, this is not general practice. This is a wide range of organizations. General practice, I think, is very different, but it's not without its challenges, as we've seen in the past 12 months in terms of managing the employment relationship throughout COVID. In terms of employers, 31% said that they think relationships have worsened, 38% said there's been no change, but 30% said that the situation had improved. I think in many ways, prior to COVID, employers always said, working from home, no, you can't do that, it's not possible. Working flexibly, we'd rather you didn't. We want you in the office, we want it to be a conventional relationship, and we can't see any reason why that should change. I think attitudes have changed a little bit in terms of flexibility. Relationships and productivity have changed and probably in some respects have worsened, and COVID and trust between employers and employees has changed as well. So there you go, just some basic stuff there. I think the final thing there is that there's this big thrust on social responsibility and care for employees throughout COVID. And again, our best clients are all over this like a rash. Our more stressed clients tend to find that they are having more problems engaging and managing their workforce during the current period because they're not investing as much time and effort. Just a word on leadership now in general practice. Now, this is an interesting one. GPs and practice managers born leaders. We all know when we go and recruit a practice manager that we want somebody that has leadership capability, that has charisma, that has the ability to lead from the front. But is that necessarily the case in terms of GP partners? Well, I don't think it is. Some of the best GP partners out there are fantastic leaders, and others, quite frankly, still want to be clinicians and really don't want to be involved in the leadership of staff. So I think it's important that partnerships think about leadership, think about who is best equipped to deal with leadership, and they take time to develop leadership skills in order that they can lead from the front with their practice managers. Without a doubt, in the current circumstances, leadership has been under the spotlight. Visible leadership during the current period has been absolutely vital. It's particularly where we've got remote workforces, people worried about their health, people worried about health and safety and delivering services. And I think people are very worried at the moment about dilemmas and conflicts. We need to deliver services. We can't stop doing that. We need to deliver them in a different way because we have to, but that has consequences and that has risks associated with it. Whenever I'm taking a risk with my employees, I'm always involving them in that discussion to make sure that we plot the best path possible. So again, it's engagement, it's involving those people in decisions that you make as partners and practice managers in terms of service delivery in the current circumstances. Imposter syndrome. If we don't suffer as leaders with imposter syndrome from time to time, then we're probably quite a rarity. Am I good enough? Am I capable? Am I credible? And it's, you know, the best leaders out there will work very hard to make sure that they tick all of those boxes and work within their team to make sure that they feel confident about the way that they're leading their organization. Are you spurred on to work harder? Or is your capacity to celebrate success diminished? I think it's really important at the moment that we celebrate success. General practice has done a fantastic job. I am honoured to work with general practice in terms of what you do for the population. And again, I think many people in general practice feel as though they are privileged to work in general practice. It's bloody hard work. It's not easy for quite a lot of the time, but you're delivering services unlike any other organisations in the UK. You're hugely valued. So it's all about courage, hard work, teamwork, and networking. A little bit of optimism now. This is a recent survey of the HR profession in 2021. I'm optimistic about the future, increasingly so on account of the vaccine rollout and so on and so forth. So just some stats here about what people are looking forward to in the HR profession. Okay, keep clicking. Okay, I won't go through those, they're there for you to have a look at. But generally speaking, I think HR professionals, myself included, are looking forward to getting back to some sort of normality and looking forward to focusing on what we used to focus on before we were all diverted away, obviously because of COVID. Okay. Just a brief word on practice management models. And Greg, you might want to come in here. I think you've probably been hanging around in general practice for a long time as well. So you'll probably remember the days of district health authorities and family health services authorities. So please feel free to chip in. When I joined the health service, gosh, that was what, 30 years ago, something like that. Worked in an FHSA. Very local commissioning of services through family health services authorities. It seemed to me at the time that there were very good informal relationships between GPs, not practice managers, GPs and the commissioning services, and it was done on a very local basis. GPs were at the time definitely part of the NHS family. They were tied into it. They were like a hospital in many ways, or an ambulance trust in many ways. They were part of the fabric. I think if you move across to the now there, you're definitely independent contractors to the health service. You're independent businesses and you've got to deliver, and if you don't deliver, you'll sink. Again, back to then, GPs integrated into the NHS funding and reimbursement. Lots of things were funded and reimbursed directly to general practice in the past. Not so the case anymore. It's that sink or swim business ideology that we see nowadays, independent businesses that can go bust. And of course, we know that the model that's traditionally used for general practice, the partnership model, exposes those GP partners to a great many risks that people that run limited companies just aren't involved in. So it's a sink or swim business ideology. And of course, back in the day, we had very light touch regulation. So we weren't running around as general practices making sure that we were doing everything, making sure that we were ticking all the contract boxes and the CQC boxes and delivering services. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that where we've gone to, but certainly it's a very different environment nowadays for those GPs that are worried about those rafts of regulation. Simple funding streams, general practice managers. I think if you go back to Greg's first slide when we were talking about the role of general practice, understanding GMS contracts, understanding local services, understanding the relationship between GPs and primary care networks, never used to be there. It's much more complicated now, and again, much of the work that's required to understand that falls upon the shoulders of those GP practice managers, but it has to be in partnership. And then we've got NHS support for GPs. Well, there isn't much in terms of nowadays. I think that's changed significantly.
I think that's quite right. I mean, we've heard from Richard Vautry this morning as well, John, you may not have been there, about the changes to the GP contract for the next year from the 1st of April. And even though there are fewer changes this year, the contract has now become so unbelievably complex with the GMS component, the enhanced services, changes to vaccination, PCN work, other national issues, and then there's the HR and the premises and other legal things on top. It's in the old days we used to have something called the Red Book, and it was complicated enough, but you could understand it as a whole entity around how GPs were funded and reimbursed. it's now so complicated that business acumen, which is not what all GPs have, is so essential in a practice manager. And I think you've really pinned that down with that thought.
Yeah, and I think this really brings into focus the role of LMCs and how lucky Nottinghamshire is. I think Notts LMC has, over the years, evolved brilliantly compared to other LMCs to provide a huge range of services, which I think are absolutely invaluable when you're talking about the complexities of contracting, of premises and lease management, of everything else that general practice does. So yeah, they're worth their weight in gold. Now, this is a really important slide for me, and it's maybe a bit of an uncomfortable slide as well in some ways. But the majority of our business is working with GPs, their practice managers, to resolve conflict. Okay, so let's have a look at this. If GPs don't get involved in this process and leave it all to their practice manager, then that in some ways is okay, but there has to be support here because conflict is difficult, conflict can be very problematic. We can get a tribe mentality in general practice, I think, as well, whereby it's the practice manager against the workforce. The practice manager can't be in that position. The practice manager has to be part of the partnership in that sense when these things happen. And I'm afraid that they do happen. So let's have a look. This is really about when business owners must step in. So let's have a think. We deal with grievances quite a lot of the time. So that's a grievance perhaps against a member of staff against another member of staff, or maybe it's a grievance against the against the practice manager from a member of staff. Difficult. Harassment and bullying is on the increase. I think people are all the more aware of their rights in terms of harassment and bullying, and one person's firm management, of course, is another person's bullying. So again, full square behind the practice manager when dealing with issues of harassment and bullying. Misconduct, we have countless cases of misconduct. We conduct investigations on behalf of general practice. We help them through the process. So again, is the partner going to be involved in that? Underperformance, capability, sickness, absence, probation and concerns at work. So these are a wide range of really tricky issues, which if they're not managed properly can cause real stress and anxiety for the practice manager. So we have to be working in partnership with our partners when we're dealing with these sorts of issues. So let's just think about the frameworks. It's all about planning, isn't it? So, oh, this is never going to happen to us. Well, it is going to happen to general practices individually, eventually. So let's think about which employees should be supporting the practice manager. So let's say there's a grievance within the workforce or harassment complaint. Let's say the senior nurse, the nurse manager has been complained of by one of the practice nurses. So how are we going to deal with that? It's serious. It has legal consequences. It has health consequences. So how are we going to make sure that our practice manager is supported in dealing with that without involving the partnership, hopefully? That's the first step. So can the assistant practice manager become involved in managing that process? Is there somebody else involved in the business that can be involved in managing that process? So we need to make sure that we're making the best of the structure beneath the practice manager to ensure that we are managing disputes effectively. So we need to plan for disputes and who's going to do what. So that, when we have a dispute, it might be a grievance, it might be a disciplinary case, it might be a sickness absence case, that we need to have different tiers of people involved, and there should be separation between those tiers in order to ensure natural justice. Tribunal judges are very keen on this sort of thing. So who's going to do what when we have a complaint of harassment or perhaps a grievance? Who's going to investigate all of that? And then once the investigation is complete, who's that investigation going to be heard by? Is it going to be investigated by the practice manager and heard by a partner? Is it going to be investigated by the assistant practice manager and heard by the practice manager? And who's going to hear appeals? Okay, so let's start thinking about how we deal with these things in advance so that when we do deal with them, we know who's doing what. And perhaps what we can also do there is prepare for these disputes by getting some basic training in place and just knowing the basics of natural justice, employment tribunal systems and so on, in order that we're all aware and ready for when these things happen. And I think the other thing here is your external network. Again, practice managers need a very healthy external network of experts around them. They cannot be experts at everything. Even the best practice managers don't know the intricacies of employment law or cloud computing services, so they've got to be good networkers. So in terms of human resources and conflicts, what's that network look like? Well, first of all, and I bang on about this all the time, we need to have appropriate insurance in place. If we have good legal fees insurance in place, then we don't have to worry as much as we would otherwise if we have something that goes really badly wrong and we end up in tribunal or court. Okay, so insurance is really important. It's legal fees insurance. I think it's the availability of affordable expertise as well. I'm plugging myself here, but obviously HR, health and safety, and obviously payroll in terms of technical queries, whatever it might be. So that, you know, those people really important. Wouldn't be complete without having that network plugged into the LMC and the BMA, for example, and the medical defence unions. They can be good as well in terms of offering advice to GPs and their practice managers when things go wrong. And the final point here is just a word on the unique challenges of managing relationship problems between practice managers and those partners. Now, these are the most difficult of issues. This is where, for example, the practice manager has a grievance against the senior partner, or maybe the practice manager's gone off sick with stress and anxiety, and they attribute it to harassment and bullying. There's a whole range of challenges here, and everything I've talked about here in terms of the framework for dealing with disputes goes out of the window when it's a dispute between the practice manager and their employer. So we, again, just another good reason to nurture and look after the relationship between the practice manager and the partners for whom that practice manager works. Just very briefly here, before I move on, some of the common problems is practice manager, well, you've not got an up-to-date contract, have you? Well, no, I can't produce a contract for myself, and my partners don't think that they should do it. They are an employee, they need the contract, they need the updates. Scenario two, we've just got our annual accounts in and we see that you've been paying yourself significant amounts of overtime. What on earth is all that about? Well, practice manager, I thought that that was okay. You did say it was okay for me to claim overtime, and I thought maybe £20,000 was okay. We've got fraud issues here. We've got communication issues. We've got all sorts of issues associated with that. So lots of stuff that needs to be thought of in terms of that very unique relationship between the partners and those practice managers. It's a strange relationship and it needs careful thought to make it work effectively. Okay, let's move down. So workforce reporting. Workforce reporting takes time. It's the same as your financial reporting, your operational reporting. It's stuff that the partners need to have at hand in order to understand the health of their business. Okay, it can be done informally, but I like to have things like traffic light systems, brief reports that we can all navigate quite quickly in order to get this an understanding of how our practice is performing. So commonly in terms of this sort of stuff, it's all recommended by the CIPD. Workforce composition, you might do this annually to make sure that your demographics, including age, gender and ethnicity, perhaps reflect the community in which you operate. And if you are in a position to adjust that to make sure that it reflects the community you serve, then perhaps you should consider doing that. Talk about recruitment and retention. So number of resignations, vaccinations, vacancies, applications and length of service. Again, a partnership that's well plugged into the workforce will know this sort of thing because they talk about it all the time. But increasingly, as general practice becomes bigger and perhaps is delivered from multiple sites, then these sorts of reporting things will be important. The skills, competencies and qualifications of your staff. I'd want to know about that if I was a GP, perhaps once every 6 months. I'd want to know that in terms of the CQC, we've got the right numbers of the right appropriately qualified people in the right place at the right time to make sure that we are adequately staffed. Performance management. So how are we doing in terms of our business? This is critically important, I think, isn't it? How do we measure the health of our organisation, its finances, the attitudes of people that are working within it? Employee relations and voice. Here, this is all about, I think, for me, updates on sickness absence, on disputes, and perhaps information that you're filtering through in terms of the way that people are feeling in the organisation, perhaps at the moment, working within a pandemic. Pay and benefits. Now, this is obviously an important one. It's all about the money, isn't it? It's got to be for any business. But again, here, if I was a GP partner, I'd want regular, perhaps monthly or quarterly reports on the overtime bill, individual pay reviews, and so on and so forth. I want to keep my fingers on the pulse there again of the finances of the business in context, in this case, with human resource management. Regulatory compliance is obviously going to be there. You want to keep an eye on the CQC and how you're doing there, and then organisation development and design. So we're keeping a constant review on how people are doing. Are people happy in their jobs? Are they swamped? Are they achieving? Are they feeling like they are engaged? Okay, so briefly here, I'm going to run through this quite quickly. About engagement, when we looked at the survey, the 2020 Practice Manager Survey, there were various key themes. One is certainly well-being, but that's being dealt with elsewhere within the conference today, so I'm not going to cover that at all. I'm going to cover another big issue, which is the degree to which practice managers are engaged by their partnerships. And I think in some cases they are very well engaged. Regular meetings, they feel as though they're involved in the business, they understand the business, they know the way in which the business is going, they know what they need to do in order to ensure the business's success. At the other end of the scale, I'm afraid that the survey indicated probably quite a lot of practice managers aren't engaged by their partners, and they are really set free to do as well as they can in the circumstances. So what do we see? When we see an engaged workforce, we see employees that have vigour, they have energy, they have enthusiasm, they have passion for what they're doing. And again, this is all part of research conducted by an organisation called Engage for Success, which is sponsored by the CIPD. They're dedicated as well, so much more dedicated than an employee that is not engaged appropriately. So there you go. So yeah, it's worth engaging our workforce in order to make sure they're dedicated and they're absorbed in their jobs as well. They love their jobs, they find their jobs interesting, they're enriched, and consequently they're motivated and they're productive. So a good case there, I think, for ensuring that we engage our practice managers and also our staff. And then we've got 4 enablers. We've got the strategic initiative. These are the enablers of engagement. Strategic initiative, having engaging managers, or in this case partners in place, ensuring there is an employee voice, so it's a two-way feedback situation. And also making sure that the organisation is seen as having integrity. It's got a social moral responsibility, both in terms of the way that it delivers services to its patients, but also in terms of the way that it treats its own staff. So 4 key enablers, and I'm going to run through those very briefly for you. But first, I'm going to do barriers to engagement. Okay, so this is going to be familiar. We're too busy to do all of this. It happens organically in general practice, I think, in many ways anyway. And if it happens organically, then don't touch it. But if it's not happening properly, then you need to think about those engagement and those elements and putting in frameworks to help it happen. So I'm too busy. I'm delivering clinical services. I'm working within PCNs, service delivery during a pandemic. And now it seems a new set of health service reforms. All of these things get in the way of what you want to do in terms of engaging your workforce. And it's a lack of structure. I think, again, the best practices in terms of the relationship between the practice manager and the partners, we see regular one-to-one meetings, perhaps with the senior partner or somebody else within the practice to talk about the way the practice is running. We want to see leadership meetings as well. So these partnership meetings that the practice manager is involved in order that they're involved in the fabric of delivering change and improvements of service. Let's see performance appraisals. Oh, heavens, absolutely vital in order that we set smart objectives. We look at the training needs of our practice managers, and we also look to recognise success and potentially reward that success. So where our practice manager is doing a fantastic job for us, then maybe we're not going to change their basic pay, but maybe we'll link their pay in some sort of way to the financial health of the organisation. I'm certainly a big believer in terms of the way that I employ staff. Yes, fair pay, yes, good market rates, but also if the business is doing well at the year end, then a significant proportion of the surplus is shared between the staff that work for me. Massively motivating and very engaging for those staff. Okay, let's have a look over here. So thinking about that employee engagement and that strategic narrative, you'll be aware of this. You've done it all for your CQC. Have we got the mission, vision and values? Do we tell the story to our new staff, to our do we talk about it with our practice manager and adapt that? Is it compelling? Does it win hearts and minds? Well, if a mission, vision and values statement in general practice doesn't win hearts and minds, I'll be very surprised. It's a bit different if you're working in a corporate, I don't know, corporate banking setup or something like that, where everybody's going, I'm not sure whether I identify with this, but everybody identifies with general practice. So it's got to be compelling and it has to be authentic, provided by the leaders in the organization. And it's got to enable people to be empowered with leaders being visible. So a little bit more on employee engagement. We have to have engaging managers. Again, so this is about the partnership in this context, making time to focus on their people. And I know that you're busy. I know that you're working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, goodness knows what as partners, but we have to nourish our relationship with our practice managers, and it should be fun. For me, the litmus test of my relationship with my staff is that when they pick up the phone and phone me, am I happy or sad? And if I'm happy about that, then generally speaking, I think there's something that's good about that relationship, even though they're going to talk to me about awful things like grievances, harassment complaints, employment tribunals. I still look forward to talking to them. You have to give your people scope as well to grow, obviously, in their jobs. Treat people as individuals, and engaging managers coach and stretch their people. They recognize and reward achievements and high performers. Controversial here, but let's make our high performers in general practice feel loved. Let's do that through managing benefits appropriately, managing flexibility appropriately, and those that aren't working so well for us, that are maybe, you know, less than satisfactory, let's make them feel uncomfortable. Okay, we can do that justifiably and legally through appropriate techniques. It's all about running your own business. Recognize pressure and mitigate, and I think that has to come here for me with agreeing priorities with your practice manager. In any business, there is a massive amount of things you could do, and you need to choose what you do very carefully, otherwise you will be a busy fool and you'll be running around trying to achieve things that aren't important. So I think that constant review of priorities and deadlines between the practice manager and also their partners is absolutely vital. Otherwise we will get stressed, we will be ineffective, and we won't be focusing on the things that really matter: the quality of services we deliver to patients, the bottom line, and our relationships within the primary care community. Employee engagement, so a little bit about organisational integrity. Not going to do this, you'll know about most of these. So we reflect our values in everyday behaviour. There's no say and do gap. When we make a promise, we deliver those promises. That might be something to do with career enrichment. It might be something to do with promotion or pay. It could be a range of things, but let's keep our promises, vitally important. And finally, that employee voice thing, really trendy at the moment. On trend is employee voice. This is all about enabling the feedback up the organisation. It's all about that interface between the organisation and its employees. Your practice manager will manage that interface. They need to be able to make sure that the employee voice is understood and heard. So it's all about reinforcing and challenging views between functions and external organisations. It's about solving people problems and making people empowered to actually get on and solve problems. It's about unlocking the potential of individuals in your organisation to use their experience, their expertise and ideas to enable them to solve problems. And it's an ongoing conversation, perhaps through engagement surveys. I don't think so generally in general practice. You're so small in many ways that it's about team meetings, one-to-one meetings, solution groups, and simple things like 3C problem solving. I'm going to show you a brief video in a moment. It's only 1 minute, okay? Let's see if this works. It's about 3C problem solving. Ah, okay.
Welcome
Can you hear?
Yes. Second guide to problem solving, part of the service development toolkit. 3C problem solving is a framework for turning simple problems into delivered solutions. This method makes continuous improvement accessible to everyone and helps you to keep track of changes. The 3 C's are concern, cause, and countermeasure. Start by listing the concern or problem. This may relate directly to performance data on ComCell. Under cause, try to describe why you think the problem is occurring. Invite people to describe potential solutions in the countermeasure column. Once an appropriate.
Okay, so I love simple solutions to problems, and I've worked in organizations where sometimes I get overwhelmed by the amount of problems, and that 3C, dead simple solution, everybody understands how it works. Everything is attributed to individuals to actually deliver stuff, and it works really well. So just a simple solution there to engage your people, to get them involved in problem solving, but also get them to manage their time effectively. I've got 2 survey forms which I was going to share with you, but they are a bit dry. And I think I'm running short of time, aren't I, Lucy and Ada? So I'm not going to show them to you. But what hopefully we can do, LMC hosts here, is perhaps circulate these afterwards to the delegates so they can have a look at these sorts of surveys. Again, would you send them out using SurveyMonkey or something like that in your organizations? You might do. I think if I was doing this in general practice, it would be a focus group, it would be a team meeting, it would be a PLT, which we take a look at the degree to which we're engaged and the things that are causing us problems with engagement. Okay, so the final slide from me today is just really, I'm always banging on about the future and the law. Let's just keep an eye on what's going on in 2021. It's going to be a quite quiet year in terms of legislation, really, compared to previous years, all because of Brexit and perhaps coronavirus. But let's keep an eye on Brexit transition and immigration. If we are looking at employing foreign nationals, then that's going to be important to us. IR35, obviously IR35, the tax regulations being introduced to the private sector from April. It's applied in general practice for years. You'll have heard on the news the other day of the lead case of Uber. They lost their case at tribunal. Please, general practice, let's keep an eye on people that we are appointing to work for us to make sure that we are appointing them appropriately. This is becoming all the more important, I think, as we work within PCNs who increasingly are engaging people, perhaps ANPs, perhaps nurses, a range of people to work within the PCN perhaps for a lead practice, and they're probably not considering carefully the mechanism through which those individuals are engaged. And we know that if we do that wrong, we can get into serious difficulty, both in terms of employment tribunals and also HMRC. So let's keep an eye on how we contract for labour. Let's prepare for changes to the national living wage from April 21. Let's keep an eye on coronavirus. Support for businesses and individuals. Not that that's particularly applicable, I think, to general practice. Let's look at, remember, we've got redundancy protection coming for pregnant employees and new parents. The period of protection for pregnant women and it is extending, so we need to keep an eye on that if we're reorganising. We've got some changes afoot within our practices and other changes on the horizon. Reforms to exit pay in the public sector maybe not apply to you, but it certainly has entered my world on a couple of occasions in terms of general practice recently. That's all about how much you can pay somebody that's left a senior manager job in the NHS. or a doctor's job for that matter. New rights for all workers to request more predictable contracts. So that's all part of that 0 hours, casual worker, gig economy, Taylor review thing. So we're going to have to keep an eye on how we contract for labour there in terms of casual workers and 0 hours workers. Again, something that's becoming perhaps a little more prevalent in terms of general practice. And finally there, an increase to the length of time required for continuity of employment to be broken. At the moment it's 7 days. Why is this important? We have a lot of retire and returns in general practice, don't we? The nurse that retires, we bring her back on a new contract. The senior receptionist, she's a good egg, we'll bring her back. But we need to do that carefully in order to make sure that we are maximising the benefits for the practice and also minimising risks. So we need to look out for the new legislation that's coming through there in terms of extended lengths of breaks in terms of continuity of service. And I think, that's it. Thank you very much.